When I was working to put on that weekend course for gay men with Jean Lloyd last year, one of the things that came up that Jean said, which I thought was really powerful, was she feels like there's a lot of behavior on apps where men dehumanize each other. And you'll get no argument from me on that point. But I thought it's easy to think of, yes, we look at each other as sex objects, but I think in the emotional realm, I think this happens too. And what I would assert is that there's nothing more manly than a real apology. Because if you can't apologize, if you can't get the other person's world, if you can't really feel compassion for how you hurt another human being, you just kind of get in the cycle of thank you next. And then after a while, that influences your character. And I think that can be an impediment to forging deep, loving relationships. So I'm just going to jump right in. Here we go. So a couple years ago, I had a really nice date with this guy. We had a great conversation, but I didn't see it as progressing forward. And I probably told him that in not the best way. I mean, I probably should have used a white lie, but sometimes I just keep it a little bit too real. He got really bitchy with me, which I then used as an excuse to be like, oh yeah, and then I said some really mean, nasty things to him. And of course, we blocked each other. There was no communication after that. But after that, I still felt kind of guilty. And if you notice, when we do mean stuff to each other, the first thing I experience, let me just keep it with me. The first thing I experience is kind of like there's a sense of letdown or disappointment. It's like, why did you do that? You're not actually wealthier for doing that. This person's pissed off at you. It was kind of silly just so you could have the last word. What, you know what I mean? You don't have to be that nasty. So that's the first thing I think. Then I kind of go to trying to justify it, right? Oh, well, he started the fight first, or he did this to me first. And then we can kind of assuage whatever guilt or disappointment we're feeling. And that's kind of how we go through life a lot of the time, at least in my opinion. If someone doesn't give us something the way we want, we get real bitchy. We might block them. I'm going to discuss this more in my second book, but I talk about in the first book, if you've done something to wrong someone, you should apologize, even if it's 4 years ago, or even if it's 5 years ago. And I write in the first book that you don't know what kind of healing that might bring to the other person, because it really might make a difference for them. You don't know. Now, some people think, oh, well, he's going to vent at me. And I say, good, let him. He's been storing up all that pain for all those years. Let him vent. I mean, I make a joke. This is a podcast. I have to keep it clean. But it's like, if you can take a 10-inch zucchini, you can take a guy yelling at you for 10 minutes. As long as it's somewhat respectful and nonviolent, et cetera, et cetera. But I think particularly in the age of Grindr and other dating apps, we have so much choice, we almost don't think about it when we do it, right? It's just so easy to just be bitchy, block, and then move on to the next guy. That's becoming like a pattern. And then that pattern is influencing our character, which then influences our ability to have real relationships when those come along. Because if we're just normally in the habit of, cutting people off and not being responsible for it. Because that's the other thing about blocking, right? It's a way of not being responsible for how you've hurt the other person. And I freely admit I've done this. So physician, heal thyself. I'm trying to do less of it. But it is a way of kind of, I'm going to get the bitchiness. I'm going to get the last word, and then I'm going to cut things off. And so if you're left feeling hurt, who cares? And I kind of explore this deeper in my second book, because when I'm looking at why relationships, particularly gay male relationships, break down in the age of apps. And I think one of the main reasons is gay guys don't know how to apologize. And so, as I said before, this is probably a male thing rather than, a gay male thing. But because we're men with men, this situation kind of exacerbates itself. And I think sometimes two things. One, people don't really want to get present to what they've done. And what I mean is, we as human beings can use our actions and language to really damage other people. And I don't mean physical violence, so that's possible too. But certainly what I've been trying to work on the past 3 or 4 months since I did the course with Jean Lloyd back in December is how do I leave people such that they don't walk away feeling worse than when we started talking? And I'm really trying to do some soul searching in that area. And I think sometimes it's real easy for people to just say like, oh, well, I'm sorry. Just, literally 2 words texting and they think that's it. And then they act like that was a big deal. And again, that doesn't even happen that often. Or the weird thing is people will think they've apologized when they haven't. So not too long ago, an ex invited me out for a drink. We literally had not hung out in about 6 or 8 months. We had exchanged some negative words since then. We had also exchanged some positive words since then. But I was a little like, well, what's he after? I assumed he needed like a loan or something like that, or a place to crash while he moved flats. I was expecting a request. So I kind of meet him for a drink. Half the time I'm just like, well, he's waiting to ask me something. He didn't. He just wanted to talk about all these, all the fun times we used to have and all the funny jokes we used to share. And I was kind of pleasant, but I was like, are we not going to talk about all the shady past stuff that happened between us? And let's be frank, it was mostly him. Like, he had told me at one point, I'm too busy to be your friend, or the bond we had was never really that special to me. Like, and this was someone at one point I considered marrying. So imagine like you're in love with somebody and he tells you, yeah, our bond's not that special. And there were some other shady things. I had a death in the family. He never once, like, even as a friend, texted to say, hope you're doing well, hope you're getting through it. Nothing like that. So obviously, like, the day after we hung out, I said, look, if we're going to be friends, like, are we not going to clear the air about these issues? And I tried to make, like, I said it in an email, and I tried to make it as non-threatening as possible. I just said, well, okay, this happened. It left me feeling this way. By the way, we're all human. We all make mistakes. And I didn't even say, I said, you don't even have to agree that I'm right, but can you kind of see why I'm confused, or can you see why, can you get the world of how what you said probably really deeply hurt me? No response. And I sent a follow-up text saying, like, is there a reason we can't clear the air? And he goes, oh, it's so exhausting and it's all in the past. Which I thought, like, one reason why I'm very thankful I didn't marry this guy. But to analyze that, digging up the past is exhausting only if you feel guilty. It's exhausting if there's baggage around it. It's exhausting if you're not complete with it. Now, he may be thinking he's forgotten it or tried to forget it, or he justified it away with whatever justifications we as humans use. But that's a very different thing from just owning it. And then he kind of goes to the typical, millennial response of it's borderline snowflake, as right-wingers would call us. But it was like, you're just trying to make me think that I'm evil. And it was like, no, I don't think you're evil. I just said we all have these issues in communication. I asked, would you at least get the world of how I was hurt? And he's like, I don't have time for this. So obviously, I was left with two things: that any sort of friendship with this ex is completely predicated on him never apologizing for the stuff he did to me. And then two, like, he really is not capable of getting someone else's world. That's dangerous. And I don't think he's a bad guy. Again, this is someone I really love, and I think he's got a lot of great qualities. But I see this in so many gay men that I feel like it's worth kind of me getting on my soapbox and preaching about. the ability to just dismiss someone else's pain, or just the refusal to get, this person cared for me and I shot them down and I don't feel slightly guilty about it. That's what's kind of, I would say, really creating a difficulty for men who have sex with men and gay men to have relationships that last. Because if you never have empathy for your partner, then the relationship's not going to last that long. Right? Now, people will tell themselves, oh, well, I may not have empathy for the guy on Grindr, but I would have empathy for Prince Charming when he comes along. To which I say two things. In my first book, I call them sleeping beauties, that they're kind of emotionally dead and they're just waiting for Mr. Perfect to show up, but Mr. Perfect never shows up. So that's a sleeping beauty argument of, oh, I would do that if the right guy came up. It's like, because it's either part of your character or it's not part of your character. It's just that simple. You're either someone who can take responsibility for a mistake, own it, and even if that means letting the person vent at you, man up. Or you're not that type of person. You would just like to think you are, so you tell yourself that you are, so you don't feel bad about yourself. The other way to look at it is these skills are like muscles, right? So if you don't use them for small things, they will not be there for big things. And, I was having this conversation with a friend the other day. He was asking me about the book, and I was saying, well, one thing I feel is like relationships are like building a muscle, right? You can't just go into the gym and then pick up the heaviest weight and just start lifting that. I mean, you could, but you might kill yourself. So to kind of take that analogy to gay dating, if you've never had a 3-month relationship, you probably aren't going to have a year or 2-year long relationship in the near future. And if you haven't had like a 2-year relationship, you're probably not going to be able to have a committed relationship that lasts like for the rest of your life or for 20 years. Because it's just my theory. But I don't see a lot of people who are like, oh, I was completely single till I was 27 and then I got married and it's 20 years later and it's all magical. But I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, send me their story. I'd be love to interview them and I want to know what secrets they have. But to take it back to apologizing is not just texting, I'm sorry. It's getting in the world of the other person. And it's getting real clear that my words, my actions did damage to somebody. Now, does that mean you're a bad person? No, because we all do it. I mean, that's a bad choice. It was a bad thing. But you'll actually find as you apologize to people, you'll get free. Because one, you'll see the other person get free or get some closure and get something complete. And that will be great for them and that will rub up on you. But then you're now relating to yourself as someone who is really ready for a relationship or someone who's really ready for great things in life. I mean, because it's not just, this happens around work issues too, right? This will happen around family. How many siblings or mothers and fathers and their kids stop speaking because there's one angry incident and no one can kind of pick up the phone? Because it's the lack of being able to apologize and the inability to both generate empathy for how you've left the other person, that's massively killing gay relationships. So a real man can say, I'm sorry, and let the person vent at them for 10 minutes and generate, even if you think, oh, well, I was kind of justified by it, even if you actually have a good reason, most of the times our reasons are BS, but even if you have a good reason, spend 5 minutes thinking, what was that like for that person? And then you communicate to that to the upset person. You're like, wow, I get it. Like, you were so hurt and devastated when I didn't text you back. I didn't know. I was certainly not trying to do that, but I want you to know, like, I didn't mean to hurt you, and I can see that you're in pain, and I appreciate that. See how simple that is? And my ex is like, oh, you're trying to be too deep and you're trying to make me feel evil and it's so exhausting. It was like, no, it's 5 minutes of that. And then he might open himself up because there's an old expression, what you resist will persist. And I think that's exactly the same thing with relationships. If you don't have the ability to apologize and you don't have the ability to generate compassion for people who care about you, that's going to keep coming up, right? Because you're going to keep hurting people and you're not going to be sensitive to it. And so you're just going to have a trail of people mad at you. And then after a while, it's probably subconscious, but you'll start relating to yourself as someone who only damages people. You may not see it that way. You may see it as like, oh, I'm keeping it real. Or like, oh, I say it like it is. But if you look back and all the people who have loved you or tried to build a life with you are left hurt thinking that guy's a moron or that guy's a jerk or that guy's a narcissist, you have something to be responsible for because you're the common denominator. You're the only, you're the common guy in all those 3 or 4 relationships. So yeah. So that's my soapbox. It's not just enough to just text, I'm sorry. Generate some sympathy for where the person is. Express that verbally, like, I get where you're coming from. You must have been feeling like X. And if they want to vent, let them vent. And that makes you, more manly than the, 6'4", steroid using, muscly top that you see in the club on Saturday. Because he probably can't do that. So that's my little sermon. If you guys want to read more, obviously I've got my book, Grindr Surivr, How to Find Happiness in the Age of Hookup Apps. Please like and subscribe. Leave me a comment if if you agree, if you disagree, or if you found a completely different experience. By all means, put it in the comments. So thank you guys so much and see you soon.